The first time I heard the knocking from inside Tank 7, I convinced myself it was thermal contraction. Metal expanding and contracting in the brutal Arctic cold makes all kinds of sounds. That is what I told myself as I stood there at 3 a.m., my breath forming clouds in the air, staring at the massive steel cylinder that held 50,000 gallons of diesel fuel. But thermal contraction does not knock in patterns of 3. It does not pause, as if waiting for a response, then knock again. And it certainly does not sound like knuckles rapping against metal from the inside of a sealed tank that no human being could possibly survive in. My name is Adrian, and I am 28 years old. What I am about to tell you happened 6 months ago at the Dead Horse Fuel Reserve in northern Alaska, about 10 miles from the Arctic Ocean. If you have ever wondered what happens at those remote installations you see marked on maps as tiny dots in the middle of nowhere, I can tell you. We keep the fuel flowing to research stations, emergency response teams, and the occasional military operation. It is cold, it is isolated, and it is supposed to be simple. I took the job because it paid 3 times what I was making back in Ohio, and I figured 6 months of brutal winter would set me up nicely. I want you to remember that 6 months. That is all I had to do. I made it 4. Before I go any further, I need you to do something for me. If you have experienced anything like what I am about to describe, or if you have worked in isolated locations where things did not quite add right, leave a comment below. I need to know I am not the only one who has seen this. I need to know I am not losing my mind. There were 5 of us stationed at Dead Horse that winter. Our supervisor was a man named Robert, a grizzled veteran of Arctic operations who had been working fuel depots for 20 years. He was the kind of man who could tell you the temperature just by stepping outside, who knew every pipe and valve in the facility like he knew the lines on his own hands. He was 53 years old, had a wife and 2 grown daughters back in Anchorage, and he had seen every kind of Arctic weather and equipment failure you could imagine. If something scared Robert, you knew it was serious. Then there was Paula, our maintenance engineer. She was 41, tough as nails, and could fix anything mechanical with duct tape and determination. She had worked oil rigs in the North Sea before coming to Alaska, and she had stories that would make your hair stand on end about equipment failures in sub-zero temperatures. Paula did not scare easily. She was practical, methodical, and she approached every problem like a puzzle to be solved. I trusted her judgment more than anyone else on the crew. James handled our supply logistics and radio communications. He was 35, quiet and methodical, the kind of person who kept detailed logs of everything. He had been at Dead Horse for 3 years, longer than anyone except Robert. James knew the rhythms of the facility, knew when supply shipments would arrive, knew how to navigate the complex bureaucracy of Arctic operations. He was also the most skeptical person I had ever met. If James believed something strange was happening, it meant it really was happening. And finally, there was Kevin, who like me was relatively new to Arctic work. Kevin was 26, fresh out of college with an engineering degree and a mountain of student debt. He had taken the job for the same reason I had. The money was good and the work was supposed to be straightforward. Kevin and I became fast friends during those early weeks. We were both outsiders, both trying to prove ourselves, both slightly intimidated by the vast emptiness of the Arctic. We were not friends exactly, but we were a crew. When you are isolated 200 miles from the nearest town, when the temperature drops to 60 below zero and the sun does not rise for months, you learn to get along. You learn to trust each other, to watch out for each other, because your survival depends on it. The facility itself was not much to look at. A central operations building housed our living quarters, kitchen, and control room. The building was a squat, rectangular structure painted industrial gray, with walls thick enough to keep out the brutal cold. Inside, it was warm and surprisingly comfortable. We each had our own small room, nothing fancy, just a bed, a desk, and a tiny window that looked out onto the endless white expanse. The common areas were larger: a kitchen with industrial appliances, a recreation room with a TV and some weights, a control room filled with monitors and gauges that tracked every aspect of the facility's operations. Around the operations building, arranged in a precise grid, stood 12 massive fuel storage tanks. Each one was 3 stories tall and painted white to blend with the snow. The tanks were numbered 1 through 12, arranged in 3 rows of 4. They were simple cylinders, unremarkable except for their size, connected by a network of pipes and valves that allowed fuel to be transferred between them. Each tank had a capacity of 50,000 gallons, enough to keep research stations and emergency operations running for months. Beyond the tanks lay the pipeline terminus where fuel arrived from the south, pumped hundreds of miles through underground pipes from refineries in Prudhoe Bay. The loading station sat on the far side of the complex, where aircraft and tracked vehicles could refuel before heading further north. Everything was connected by heated walkways and underground tunnels, because at 60 below zero, you do not want to be outside any longer than necessary. The walkways were enclosed tubes with reinforced plastic windows, lit by fluorescent lights that buzzed constantly. Walking through them felt like being in some kind of industrial caterpillar, isolated from the world outside. I arrived at Deadhorse in October, just as the last of the daylight was vanishing. I remember stepping off the transport aircraft and feeling the cold hit me like a physical blow. I had thought I knew what cold was. I had grown up in Ohio. I had experienced winter, but this was something else entirely. This was cold that could kill you in minutes if you were not prepared, cold that turned your breath into ice crystals before it left your mouth, cold that made exposed skin go numb in seconds. The Arctic winter is not like winter anywhere else. Starting in November, the sun does not rise. For months, you live in perpetual darkness, broken only by the brief twilight around noon that gives you a couple hours of dim, gray light. It does something to your mind, that darkness. It presses down on you, makes you feel small and isolated. Your circadian rhythm gets disrupted. You find yourself awake at strange hours, sleeping at odd times. The darkness becomes a living thing, a presence that surrounds you constantly. But I adjusted. We all did. Humans are remarkably adaptable creatures. We had our routines, our shifts, our small comforts. Robert insisted on family dinners twice a week, where all 5 of us would gather in the kitchen and share a meal. Paula organized movie nights in the recreation room. James maintained a small library of books that we could borrow. Kevin and I started a running joke about which of us could come up with the worst coffee creation using the limited supplies we had. Life at Deadhorse was strange and isolated, but it was manageable. The tanks were my responsibility. Each day, I would make rounds, checking pressure gauges, monitoring temperatures, looking for leaks or structural issues. Tank 1 through Tank 12, the same route every day, the same checks. I had a checklist that I followed religiously, 23 different items to verify for each tank. It took me about 4 hours to complete a full circuit of all 12 tanks, and I did it twice a day, once during my morning shift and once during my evening shift. The work was monotonous, but that was fine by me. Monotonous meant safe. Monotonous meant nothing was going wrong. I would bundle up in my heavy parka, pull on my insulated gloves and face mask, and head out into the cold. I would climb the metal stairs to each tank's upper access platform, check the pressure gauges and temperature sensors, examine the seals for any signs of frost damage or cracking. Then I would descend to ground level and check the bottom valves, the drainage systems, the connecting pipes. Everything was documented in my logbook, every reading carefully recorded. Tank 7 was the oldest tank in the facility. It had been installed in 1987, before the rest of the depot was even built. Robert told me it had been part of an earlier, smaller operation that got absorbed into Deadhorse when they expanded in the early 90s. The tank was scheduled for replacement in the spring, but for now, it was still in service, still holding diesel fuel, still part of my daily rounds. There was nothing particularly special about Tank 7. It looked like all the others, a massive white cylinder rising 3 stories into the Arctic darkness. The only real difference was that its paint was more faded, showing patches of rust-stained metal underneath. The stairs leading to its upper platform creaked a bit more than the others. The gauges were older models, analog instead of digital, but functionally it was the same as any other tank. I first noticed something odd about Tank 7 in mid-November, about 6 weeks after I arrived. It was nothing major, just a feeling. Every time I approached the tank, I got this sense of unease, like I was being watched. I would look around, scanning the darkness with my flashlight, but there was never anything there. Just snow and wind and the other tanks standing silent in the night. I mentioned it to Kevin one evening over dinner. "You ever get weird feelings about Tank 7? I asked. Kevin shrugged. "Not really, why?" "I do not know, it just feels off somehow, like the air is different around it." Paula overheard and laughed. "That is just the isolation getting to you. Happens to everyone. Your brain starts making up patterns where there are none, looking for threats that do not exist. It is a survival mechanism gone haywire." She was probably right. I had read about the psychological effects of isolation and prolonged darkness. Paranoia, anxiety, sensory distortions, all common symptoms. I made a mental note to spend more time in the recreation room, to stay social, to not let my mind play tricks on me. But the feeling did not go away. The knocking started on November 23rd, a date I will never forget. It was a Tuesday, though days of the week lost most of their meaning in the Arctic. One day blended into the next, distinguished only by shift rotations and meal times. I had just finished checking Tank 6 and was moving to Tank 7. It was 3 a.m. and I was on night shift. The wind was howling that night, which was not unusual. Wind in the Arctic is constant, a living thing that shrieks and moans and throws snow like tiny daggers. I had my heavy parka on, my face mask, my insulated gloves. My flashlight cut through the darkness, creating a small circle of visibility in the endless black. The temperature was -58 degrees Fahrenheit. I know this because I checked my weather monitor before heading out. At that temperature, exposed skin freezes in less than 5 minutes. Your eyelashes freeze together if you blink too long. The moisture in your nose turns to ice. Even with all my cold weather gear, I could feel the Arctic trying to kill me, trying to find any gap in my defenses and freeze me solid. I climbed the metal stairs to Tank 7's upper access platform. The stairs were coated in ice, as they always were, and I had to move carefully to avoid slipping. One fall from 30 feet up would be fatal, and there would be no quick rescue in these conditions. I reached the platform and pulled out my flashlight, preparing to check the gauges. That is when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. I froze. The sound was coming from inside the tank, clear as day despite the howling wind. 3 distinct knocks, metal on metal, deliberate and measured. My heart started pounding. I stood there, my flashlight beam trembling slightly, staring at the curved white surface of the tank. The wind screamed around me. Snow swirled in the beam of my flashlight, creating hypnotic patterns. I waited. Maybe I had imagined it. Maybe it was just the wind, or the metal settling, or something else with a rational explanation. 30 seconds passed, a minute. Then it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Same pattern, same rhythm, same location, somewhere deep inside the tank. I pressed my hand against the cold metal surface. The vibration of the knocks traveled through the steel and into my palm. Whatever was making that sound, it was real. It was physical. This was not my imagination. But that was impossible. The tank was sealed. It had been sealed for decades. There was no way anything could be inside except 50,000 gallons of diesel fuel. No person, no animal, no equipment, just fuel. I pulled out my radio with shaking hands. "Robert, this is Adrian. You there?" Static crackled for a moment before his voice came through. "Yeah, Adrian, what is going on?" "I am at Tank 7. I am hearing sounds, knocking sounds, coming from inside the tank." There was a pause, knocking. 3 knocks over and over. It sounds like someone is inside. Another pause, longer this time. Adrian, there is nothing inside that tank except diesel fuel. You know that. I know what I am hearing, Robert. It is not the wind. It is not thermal contraction. Something is knocking from inside the tank. I could hear Robert sigh through the radio. All right, finish your rounds and come back to the operations building. We will talk about it. I stood there for another 5 minutes listening. The knocking came 2 more times, always the same pattern, always 3 knocks with a pause in between. Then it stopped, and no matter how long I waited, it did not return. I completed my rounds in record time, barely glancing at the other tanks, and hurried back to the warmth of the operations building. Robert was waiting for me in the control room, a cup of coffee in his hand. "Tell me exactly what you heard," he said. I described the knocking in detail, the rhythm, the volume, the way it seemed to come from deep within the tank. Robert listened without interrupting, his expression unreadable. When I finished, he nodded slowly. Tank 7 is old. The metal expands and contracts with temperature changes. In extreme cold, that can create all kinds of sounds. Pops, creaks, groans. Sometimes it can sound almost rhythmic. "I know what thermal contraction sounds like," I said. "This was different." "Different how?" "It was deliberate, like someone was trying to communicate." Robert set down his coffee. "Adrian, I am going to be straight with you. Isolation does things to people. The darkness, the cold, the monotony, it messes with your head. You start seeing patterns that are not there, hearing things that have rational explanations. I have seen it happen to good people, smart people. It does not mean you are crazy. It just means you are human." I wanted to argue, but what could I say? I had heard knocking from inside a sealed fuel tank. Even saying it out loud sounded absurd. "Get some sleep," Robert said. "If you hear it again tomorrow, we will take a closer look at the tank. Run some diagnostics, check for structural issues. Fair enough." I nodded and headed to my quarters, but sleep did not come easily that night. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind howl outside my window. Every creak and groan of the building made me jump. I kept thinking about those 3 knocks, the deliberate rhythm, the way they seemed to be waiting for a response. The next day, I did not hear anything from Tank 7. I did my morning rounds, checking all 12 tanks, and everything was normal. The gauges all read properly. The temperatures were within expected ranges. There were no unusual sounds, no anomalies. By the time I finished, I was starting to feel foolish. Maybe Robert was right. Maybe I had been hearing things, letting my imagination run wild in the darkness. I spent the day catching up on paperwork, organizing my logs, trying to keep busy. Kevin and I played cards in the recreation room that evening. James made dinner, some kind of pasta dish with canned vegetables. Paula told stories about her time on North Sea oil rigs. Everything was normal, routine, comfortable. But that night, when I went out for my 11 p.m. rounds, the knocking returned. This time I was ready. I had brought a small recording device, the kind we use to document equipment issues. When I reached the upper platform of Tank 7, I turned it on and held it against the metal surface of the tank. I did not have to wait long. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was louder this time, more insistent. I could feel it vibrating through the tank's structure. I held the recorder steady, capturing every detail. Knock, knock, knock. I found my voice. "Hello," I called out, feeling ridiculous even as I did it. "Is someone in there?" The knocking stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound. I stood there in the Arctic darkness, the wind screaming around me, staring at the blank white surface of the tank. My flashlight beam played across the metal, revealing nothing but faded paint and occasional rust stains. "Hello," I called again. "If someone is in there, knock again, please." Nothing. I waited 5 minutes, 10 minutes. My fingers were going numb despite my gloves, and I could feel the cold starting to seep through my parka. Finally, I gave up and continued my rounds. Back in the operations building, I played the recording for Kevin. He listened with headphones on, his expression growing more concerned with each second. "That is definitely knocking," he said, pulling the headphones off. "You need to show this to Robert." "And say what?" "That I think someone is trapped inside a sealed fuel tank." "What else could it be?" I did not have an answer. That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about the knocking, the way it had stopped when I spoke to it, as if whatever was making the sound had heard me, as if it was listening. The next morning, at our daily meeting, I brought up the issue again. This time I had the recording to back me up. "Tank 7 is making unusual sounds," I said, trying to keep my voice steady and professional. "I have documented them. I think we need to investigate." Robert looked up from his coffee, a hint of annoyance in his eyes. "We talked about this, Adrian." "I know, but I have a recording now. I want you all to hear it." I played the audio for the group. In the quiet of the operations room, with all 5 of us listening, the knocking was unmistakable. 3 distinct impacts, metal on metal, deliberate and measured. James leaned forward. "That is not thermal contraction." Paula frowned. "Play it again." I played it 3 more times. Each time the same pattern. 3 knocks, a pause, then silence. "Could be cavitation in the fuel," Paula said, though she did not sound convinced. "Air pockets moving through the liquid can create sounds." "At 3 and when the fuel is completely still," Kevin said. "No pumps running, no transfers happening." Robert was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he thought. Finally, he set down his coffee and looked at me. "You said you spoke to it." I asked if someone was in there. The knocking stopped immediately. And did not start again. Not while I was there. Robert exchanged glances with Paula. Some unspoken communication passed between them. "All right," Robert said finally. "Paula, I want you and Adrian to run a full diagnostic on Tank 7 today. Check everything: seals, sensors, structural integrity, fuel quality. If something is off, I want to know what it is." Paula nodded. "We will need to drain a sample for analysis. Check for contamination." "Do it." "James, pull up the maintenance records for Tank 7. I want to know every time that tank has been serviced, every inspection, every anomaly, everything." The meeting broke up, and Paula and I suited up for the cold. Outside, the perpetual twilight that passed for noon in the Arctic winter gave us just enough light to see by. The sky was a deep purple-gray, the sun hovering somewhere below the horizon, painting the snow in shades of blue and violet. We walked to Tank 7 in silence, our boots crunching on the frozen snow. The wind had died down, leaving an eerie stillness that was almost worse than the constant howling. In the Arctic, silence feels unnatural, threatening. Paula carried a toolbox filled with diagnostic equipment. I had my standard inspection gear plus a sample collection kit. We climbed the stairs to the upper platform, and Paula began connecting sensors to various monitoring ports on the tank. "This is going to take a while," she said, her voice muffled by her face mask. "The computer needs to run a complete structural scan. We are talking about 40,000 pounds of metal and 50,000 gallons of fuel. Every weld, every seal, every stress point needs to be checked." I nodded and moved to collect a fuel sample from the main valve. The process was straightforward. Attach the collection bottle, open the valve slightly, let a small amount of fuel drain out, seal the bottle, close the valve. I had done it dozens of times. But as soon as I opened the valve, I knew something was wrong. The fuel that came out was not diesel. I mean, it looked like diesel, dark amber, the right viscosity, but it was cold. Not just cold, but freezing. Diesel fuel should not freeze at -50 degrees. It should be liquid, flowing easily. This fuel was almost slushy, with ice crystals forming in it as it drained into my collection bottle. "Paula," I said, "look at this." She came over and examined the sample. Her eyes widened behind her goggles. That should not be possible, she muttered. Diesel freezes at -40, maybe -50 with additives, but this is colder, much colder. How much colder? She pulled out a temperature probe and inserted it into the sample bottle. The digital readout flickered, then settled on a number that made no sense. -120 degrees Fahrenheit. That cannot be right, Paula said. The probe must be malfunctioning. But we both knew the probe was not malfunctioning. The fuel sample was frozen solid within 30 seconds, turning from liquid to a dark amber ice. Paula and I spent the next 4 hours running every diagnostic we had. The results were consistent and completely impossible. The tank's structural integrity was perfect. No cracks, no stress fractures, no points of weakness. The seals were airtight. The sensors were functioning properly, reporting normal temperatures and pressures. According to every instrument we had, Tank 7 was operating exactly as it should be. Except the fuel inside was frozen at temperatures that should not be possible, and something was knocking from within. I do not understand this, Paula said as we packed up our equipment. Every reading says the tank is normal. Temperature sensors inside say the fuel is at -30 degrees, which is fine, but this sample says otherwise. Could the sensors be wrong? All of them at the same time? That is not how equipment fails. You get one bad sensor, maybe two, but every sensor reporting the same false reading. That does not happen. We brought the frozen fuel sample back to the operations building. Robert, James, and Kevin gathered around as Paula explained our findings. So you are saying the fuel is somehow colder inside the tank than the sensors are reporting, James said. I am saying I do not know what is happening, Paula replied. Nothing about this makes sense. Robert picked up the sample bottle, examining the frozen fuel inside. Did you hear any knocking while you were working? No, I said. It was completely silent. Maybe whatever was making the noise has stopped, Kevin suggested hopefully. But I knew better. The knocking had not stopped. It was just waiting. That night, I volunteered for the midnight shift. I told Robert I wanted to keep an eye on Tank 7 to see if I could document any more anomalies. The truth was, I needed to know what was happening. The mystery was eating at me, making it impossible to focus on anything else. I bundled up and headed out into the darkness. The temperature had dropped to -65, cold enough that my breath froze instantly, creating a cloud of ice crystals around my face. The heated walkways provided some relief, but the final approach to the tanks meant exposing yourself to the full fury of the Arctic night. I made my rounds of the other tanks first, checking everything twice, making sure I was not neglecting my actual duties. Everything was normal. Tanks 1 through 6 and tanks 8 through 12 all showed proper readings. No unusual sounds, no anomalies. Finally, I approached Tank 7. I climbed the stairs slowly, my heart pounding. The metal steps creaked under my weight, a lonely sound in the vast silence. I reached the upper platform and stood there waiting. 5 minutes passed, nothing. 10 minutes. The cold was starting to seep through my gear, making my fingers ache. 15 minutes. Just as I was about to give up and descend, it started. Knock, knock, knock. But this time, the knocking was followed by something new. A scraping sound, long and slow, like something being dragged across the inside of the tank. Metal on metal, a horrible screeching that made my teeth ache and sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I backed away from the tank, my heart hammering in my chest. The scraping continued, moving around the interior of the tank in a slow circle. It sounded like claws or fingernails dragging across steel. Then it stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard something else. A sound so faint I almost missed it under the wind. Breathing. Heavy, labored breathing, as if something was struggling for air. It was coming from inside the tank, from deep within the frozen fuel. My hands shaking, I pulled out my radio. "Robert," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "you need to come to Tank 7 right now." "What is happening?" Robert's voice crackled through the speaker. "Just come, please, and bring everyone." 10 minutes later, all 5 of us stood on the upper platform of Tank 7. Robert, Paula, James, Kevin, and me crowded together in the darkness, our flashlights creating overlapping circles of light on the tank's surface. "What did you hear?" Robert asked. "Just wait," I said. We stood there in silence. 1 minute, 2, 5. "Adrian," Robert said gently, "there is nothing." Knock, knock, knock. Robert's eyes went wide. Kevin took a step back. Paula pressed her hand against the tank, feeling the vibrations. The knocking continued, louder now, more frantic. And then the scraping started again, that horrible dragging sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "What the hell is that?" Kevin whispered, his voice shaking. "I do not know," Robert said, but his face had gone pale even in the dim light. The scraping circled the tank once, twice, 3 times. Then it stopped, leaving us in terrifying silence. "There is something in there," James said quietly. "Something alive." "That is not possible," Paula said, but she did not sound convinced. Then we heard the breathing again. All 5 of us this time, there was no mistaking it. Heavy, rasping breaths, struggling and desperate, coming from deep within the sealed tank. And then something that made my blood run cold. A voice. "Help me." It was barely audible, a whisper carried through metal and fuel, but it was unmistakably human. "Please help me." Kevin grabbed my arm. "Someone is in there, someone is trapped in there." "That is impossible," Robert said, but his voice lacked conviction. "The tank has been sealed for years. No one could survive in there. No one could breathe. The fuel would kill them in minutes." "Then what are we hearing?" Paula demanded. The voice came again, clearer this time. "Cold, so cold, please." "We have to open it," I said. "If someone is in there, they need help." "No," Robert said immediately. "Absolutely not. Opening a fuel tank is a massive safety risk. We would need special equipment, safety protocols, environmental controls. We cannot just pop the hatch and look inside." "But if someone is trapped?" "No one is trapped in there." Robert's voice was sharp, angry. "Use your head, Adrian. How would they get in? When would they get in? We have been here for 2 months. You check this tank twice a day. Paula and I have been here for years. There has never been any unauthorized access, never any missing personnel. Whatever we are hearing, it is not a person." "Then what is it?" Kevin asked. Robert had no answer. We stood there in the darkness, listening to the impossible voice calling for help from inside the sealed tank, and none of us knew what to do. If you are still watching this, if you have made it this far into my story, I need you to understand something. What happened next changed everything. It changed how I see the world, how I understand reality. And if you want to know what we found when we finally opened that tank, if you want to understand what was really waiting in the darkness, then please hit that subscribe button and share this video. Because what I am about to tell you next is the part that still gives me nightmares. The part that made me realize we had made a terrible, terrible mistake. We returned to the operations building and spent the next hour arguing about what to do. Robert insisted we needed to report the anomaly to headquarters and wait for instructions. Paula wanted to run more diagnostics. James suggested we drain the tank and examine it properly. Kevin and I thought we should open it immediately. "If someone is in there, every minute counts," I argued. "And if something else is in there," Robert shot back, "something we do not understand, what then? What could possibly be in there except fuel? I do not know, and that is exactly why we need to be careful." Finally, Robert made the call to headquarters. He explained the situation, the knocking, the voices, the impossible fuel temperatures. I watched his face as he listened to their response. He did not look happy. When he hung up, he turned to us. They are sending an emergency response team. They will be here in 3 days. 3 days, Kevin said. That is too long. It is what it is. In the meantime, we are not to approach Tank 7 except for essential safety checks. No investigations, no diagnostics, nothing. We wait for the experts. That night, none of us slept well. I lay in my bed, listening to the building creak and groan in the wind, and I could not stop thinking about that voice, the desperation in it, the cold. Someone was in that tank and we were just leaving them there. Around 2 a.m., I heard a knock on my door. 3 knocks. I sat up immediately, my heart racing. Adrian, it was Kevin's voice coming from the hallway. Are you awake? I got out of bed and opened the door. Kevin was standing there in his pajamas, his face pale. I cannot sleep, he said. I keep hearing that voice, keep thinking about someone trapped in there, freezing, calling for help. I know, me too. What if Robert is wrong? What if someone really is in there? I did not answer. We went to the kitchen and made coffee, sitting at the table in silence. After a while, Paula joined us, then James. None of us could sleep. We all sat there drinking coffee, not saying much, just trying to process what we had heard. Robert appeared around 4 a.m., looking like he had not slept either. I am going to do a check of Tank 7, he announced. Just a visual inspection, nothing invasive. Adrian, you are with me. We suited up and headed out into the darkness. The wind had picked up again, and snow was falling in thick sheets, limiting visibility to just a few feet. We made our way carefully along the heated walkway until we reached the tank area. As we approached Tank 7, I noticed something strange. The snow around the base of the tank had melted. Not completely, but enough to create a ring of exposed ground around the tank's foundation. In the Arctic in December, snow does not melt. The temperature was negative 70 degrees. Nothing should be melting. Robert saw it too. He pulled out his thermal camera and scanned the tank. That is not possible, he muttered. He showed me the screen. The tank was glowing bright red on the thermal image, not just warm but hot, radiating heat that should not exist. The sensors inside say it is negative 30 degrees, I said. Then the sensors are lying, or something is making them lie. We climbed the stairs to the upper platform. As we ascended, I felt the temperature change. By the time we reached the top, it was noticeably warmer, almost pleasant compared to the brutal cold below. Robert pressed his bare hand against the tank's surface. Steam rose from where his skin met the metal. It is hot, he said. The tank is hot. Before I could respond, the knocking started. But this time, it was not rhythmic. It was frantic, desperate, dozens of impacts all at once, like something was throwing itself against the inside of the tank. Boom, 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 boom. The entire structure vibrated with the force of the impacts. Robert and I backed away, grabbing the platform's railing for support. Then the voices started. Not one voice, but many. Dozens of voices, maybe hundreds, all calling out at once. Help us. Let us out. Please. Cold. Dark. Dying. The voices were everywhere, surrounding us, coming from inside the tank and somehow also from the air itself. Men, women, children, all crying out in desperation and fear. Robert pulled out his radio. Everyone get to Tank 7, now emergency. Within minutes, Paula, James, and Kevin arrived, running despite the cold. They stopped at the base of the stairs, staring up at us. What is happening? Paula shouted over the noise. Listen, Robert called back. The voices continued, an awful chorus of suffering, and beneath them a new sound emerged. A low, resonant humming that made my bones vibrate and my teeth ache. It was not a sound that should come from metal and fuel. It was organic, alive, and deeply wrong. Then, as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The knocking ceased. The voices fell silent. The humming faded away. We stood there in the sudden quiet, our hearts pounding, our breath coming in short gasps. "We need to open it," James said from the base of the stairs. "We need to know what is in there." Robert looked at me, then back down at the others. I could see the conflict on his face. Every protocol, every safety regulation said we should wait for the emergency team. But we had all heard those voices. We all knew that waiting might mean condemning someone, or something, to 3 more days of whatever hell existed inside that tank. "All right," Robert said finally, "but we do this right. Paula, get the emergency access kit. James, set up the atmospheric monitoring equipment. Kevin, I need you in the control room watching all the other tanks. If anything changes with any of them, you radio us immediately. Understood?" Kevin nodded and hurried back to the operations building. The rest of us began preparations. Opening a fuel tank is not as simple as turning a valve. The top access hatch is sealed with 12 heavy-duty bolts, each one requiring specific torque to remove safely. There are pressure concerns, vapor concerns, structural concerns. Under normal circumstances, it would take a trained crew hours to safely open a tank. But these were not normal circumstances. Paula arrived with the emergency access kit, a heavy case filled with specialized tools. She and Robert began the process of loosening the bolts on the access hatch, while James set up atmospheric sensors around the platform. I stood watch with a fire extinguisher and a portable ventilation fan, standard safety equipment for this kind of operation. The first bolt came off with a screech of metal on metal. The second followed. By the third bolt, I noticed something strange. The metal around the hatch was covered in a thin layer of frost, despite the heat radiating from the rest of the tank. It was as if the cold was concentrated there, trying to escape through the sealed opening. "Robert," I said, pointing to the frost, "look at this." He paused, examining the ice crystals forming on the metal. "That does not make sense. The tank is hot. This should not be freezing." "Nothing about this makes sense," Paula muttered, working on the fourth bolt. As they removed more bolts, the frost spread, creeping across the hatch like a living thing. By the time they reached the 10th bolt, the entire access hatch was covered in a thick layer of ice. Our breath, which had been dispersing quickly in the relatively warm air around the tank, now hung in visible clouds. "Temperature is dropping," James announced, checking his sensors. "Down to -20, -30, -40. "That is not possible," Paula said. "The tank is radiating heat. We measured it." "Well, something is making it cold now," James replied. Robert removed the 11th bolt. "One more to go." "Everyone ready?" he asked. We nodded, though none of us felt ready. How could we be ready for something we could not understand? Robert positioned himself by the final bolt. "On 3, 1, 2, 3. He turned the wrench. The bolt came loose. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the hatch burst open. Not slowly, not carefully, but violently, as if something inside had been pushing against it. The circular door flew upward and clanged against the safety rail. A cloud of vapor rushed out, thick and white and impossibly cold. We all stumbled backward, shielding our faces. The temperature plummeted. My exposed cheeks went numb instantly. Ice formed on my goggles, making it hard to see. When the vapor finally cleared, we approached the open hatch cautiously. Robert shone his flashlight down into the opening. "Oh God," he whispered. I moved beside him and looked down. The interior of the tank was not what it should be. Instead of seeing diesel fuel 30 feet below, I was looking down into darkness. Not the darkness of a shadow or an unlit space, but absolute darkness. A void that seemed to swallow light itself. My flashlight beam just disappeared into it, not reflecting off anything, not illuminating anything, just gone. And in that darkness I could see lights, thousands of them, tiny points of light, distant and cold, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. They were not stars exactly, but something similar. something that existed in a space that should not exist inside a fuel tank. "What is that?" Paula breathed. "I do not know," Robert said, but his voice was shaking. James moved forward with his atmospheric sensor, extending it through the hatch to sample the air inside. The device immediately started beeping frantically, its display showing readings that made no sense. "The atmosphere inside is not air," James said, his voice tense. "I am getting trace elements of. I do not even know what this is. The computer cannot identify it." "How deep does it go?" I asked, staring into the impossible void. "The tank is 30 feet deep," Robert said. "That is all it can be. That is all it is." But we could all see that was not true. The darkness stretched down much farther than 30 feet. It looked bottomless, infinite, like we were staring into space itself. "Where is the fuel?" Paula asked. "We pumped in 50,000 gallons. Where did it go?" No one had an answer. Robert pulled a coin from his pocket, a quarter, and dropped it into the opening. We waited for the sound of it hitting the bottom, or splashing into fuel, or clanging against metal. We never heard it land. We stood there for a long time, just staring into that impossible space. The cold radiating from the opening was intense, far beyond anything the Arctic could produce. I could feel it in my bones, a cold that went deeper than temperature, a cold that felt existential. Then something moved in the darkness. It was hard to see at first, just a slight shift in the patterns of light. But then it moved again, closer this time, and I realized we were looking at something vast, something that existed in that darkness, that lived in it. "Back away," Robert said quietly. "Everyone back away from the hatch." We retreated to the edge of the platform. The thing in the darkness continued to move, rising toward the opening. I caught glimpses of it, suggestions of form, impressions of substance, but nothing concrete. It was like trying to see something in deep water, catching only shadows and hints of movement. The lights in the darkness began to pulse, a slow rhythm that matched my heartbeat. No, that was wrong. My heartbeat was matching them, syncing with whatever was down there. "Close it," Paula said. "We need to close it now." Robert did not argue. He and Paula moved forward, grabbed the hatch, and tried to pull it shut. It would not budge. It was as if something was holding it open from below. "Help us," Robert shouted. James and I rushed forward. All four of us pulled on the hatch, straining against whatever force was keeping it open. The metal was so cold it burned my hands even through my gloves. With a final heave, the hatch slammed shut. Robert immediately began replacing the bolts, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold the wrench. "Faster," Paula urged, looking at the sealed hatch with wide eyes. Something hit the underside of the hatch, a single impact so powerful it made the entire platform shake. Then another, then another. The bolts Robert had already replaced held, but barely. "Almost there," Robert said through gritted teeth, working on the last bolt. The impacts continued, rhythmic and powerful, and beneath them we heard the voices again. But they were different now, not calling for help but laughing. Cold, hollow laughter that echoed from the depths of that impossible space. Robert tightened the final bolt. The hatch was sealed. The impact stopped, the laughter faded, silence returned. We stood there on the platform, gasping for breath, none of us able to speak. Finally, Robert's radio crackled. "Robert, this is Kevin. Are you okay? What happened? Every tank just went crazy. All the sensors are going haywire." Robert pulled out his radio with a shaking hand. "We are coming back. Everyone meet in the control room, now." We descended from the platform and hurried back to the operations building. My mind was reeling, trying to process what we had just seen. That void, those lights, that thing moving in the darkness. In the control room, Kevin had pulled up monitoring displays for all 12 tanks. He was right. The sensors were showing impossible readings, temperatures fluctuating wildly, pressure spikes, unusual acoustic signatures. It started the moment you opened Tank 7, Kevin said. Every tank all at once. It is like they are connected somehow. They are not connected, James said. Each tank is independent. Separate fuel supplies, separate systems. Then how do you explain this? Kevin gestured at the displays. No one could. We spent the next hour documenting everything. Robert wrote a detailed report. Paula downloaded all the sensor data. James recorded his atmospheric readings. I provided my first-hand account of what we had seen. When we finished, Robert placed a call to headquarters. The conversation was tense. We could only hear Robert's side, but it was clear the people on the other end were not believing what he was telling them. I do not care how impossible it sounds, Robert said, his voice sharp. I am telling you what we saw. That tank is not storing fuel. It is storing something else, something we cannot explain. More talking from the other end. No, we are not evacuating. Not yet. The emergency team arrives in 2 days. We can last that long, but you need to understand this facility is compromised. All 12 tanks are showing anomalies now. Whatever is in Tank 7, it is spreading. He listened for another minute, then ended the call and turned to us. They think we are all experiencing some kind of shared psychosis, isolation-induced hallucination. They are still sending the emergency team, but they are treating this as a mental health crisis, not a physical anomaly. That is insane, Paula said. We have data, sensor readings, recordings, which they think we are misinterpreting or which are malfunctioning. They cannot accept that what we are describing is real, because it violates everything we know about physics and reality. So what do we do? Kevin asked. Robert was quiet for a moment. We wait, we keep monitoring, and we stay away from the tanks unless absolutely necessary. Whatever is happening, it seems to respond to our presence, so we minimize contact. For the rest of that day, we stayed inside. We watched the monitors, tracked the sensor readings, and tried to make sense of the impossible. The readings from all 12 tanks continued to show anomalies, but they were gradually stabilizing. By evening, most of them had returned to something approaching normal. Only Tank 7 remained truly aberrant, its sensors still reporting impossible temperatures and pressures. That night we instituted a new rule. No one went outside alone. No one approached the tanks without at least 2 other people present. We were scared, though none of us wanted to admit it. I tried to sleep but could not. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that darkness, those lights, that suggestion of something vast and incomprehensible moving in the void. Around midnight, I gave up and went to the recreation room. Kevin was already there, sitting on the couch, staring at nothing. Cannot sleep either, I asked. He shook his head. Every time I try, I hear those voices, all those people calling for help. Were they real? Were they ever real? I do not know. What do you think it is, that thing in the tank? I sat down beside him. I have been thinking about that, about what we saw, and I keep coming back to something my physics professor said in college. He told us that reality might be much stranger than we think, that the universe might have dimensions we cannot perceive, spaces that exist parallel to our own. He called them pocket realities, places that exist alongside our world but do not follow the same rules. You think that is what is in the tank, a pocket reality? Maybe, or a doorway to one. Think about it. The tank is sealed, but inside is this infinite space. Space that should not fit inside a 30-foot cylinder. Space with its own atmosphere, its own light sources. That is not something from our world. Kevin was quiet for a while. Then, if you are right, if that is a doorway to somewhere else, then what was that thing we saw moving? What lives in a place like that? I did not have an answer, did not want to think about an answer. We sat there in silence for a long time. Eventually, Paula joined us, then James. We all sat together, none of us sleeping, all of us processing what we had witnessed. Robert appeared around 4 a.m. looking haggard. The other tanks, he said without preamble. I have been studying the sensor data. There is a pattern. Every 12 hours, all the tanks show a synchronized fluctuation. Temperature drops, pressure spikes, then everything normalizes. It is like they are breathing. Breathing, Paula said. I know how it sounds, but look at the graphs. It is rhythmic, regular, like a pulse. He showed us the data on his tablet. He was right. The fluctuations were too regular to be random, too synchronized to be coincidence. What does it mean? James asked. I think the tanks are not separate entities anymore, Robert said. I think whatever is in Tank 7 has connected them somehow. They are all part of the same system now. Then we are not dealing with one anomaly, I said. We are dealing with 12. The implications of that settled over us like a weight. The next day passed slowly. We maintained basic operations, checked essential systems, but avoided the tanks as much as possible. The synchronized fluctuations continued every 12 hours, like clockwork, and with each cycle, the anomalies became more pronounced. By evening, we could hear the knocking again, but this time it was not just coming from Tank 7, it was coming from all of them. 12 tanks, all knocking in unison, the sound carrying across the frozen landscape and into the operations building. Knock, knock, knock. Over and over and over. How much longer until the emergency team arrives? Kevin asked, his voice tight with stress. 16 hours, Robert replied. 16 hours felt like an eternity. That night I was awakened by a knock on my door. 3 knocks, slow and deliberate. I sat up, my heart racing. Adrian, it was Paula's voice muffled through the door. Can you help me with something? I checked my watch, 2 a.m. Why would Paula need help at 2 a.m.? Adrian, please, I need your help. Something about the voice was wrong. The tone was right, the inflection was Paula's, but there was something hollow underneath it, like someone doing an impression without quite understanding what they were imitating. I got out of bed and moved to the door but did not open it. Paula, is that you? Yes, please open the door. I need to show you something. What do you need to show me? Pause, then, please open the door, Adrian. I backed away from the door. Paula, if that is really you, tell me something only you would know. Tell me about the story you told us. About the North Sea rig. Longer pause this time. Please open the door. What was the story, Paula? Open the door, Adrian, let me in. The voice was changing now, losing Paula's inflection, becoming flatter, more mechanical. And underneath it, I could hear other voices. Dozens of them, all speaking in unison, all saying the same words. Open the door, let us in. Open the door, let us in. I grabbed my radio. Everyone, this is Adrian. Do not open your doors. Something is outside pretending to be us. Robert's voice came back immediately. Confirmed. I have got something at my door claiming to be James. James, you there? I am here, James replied. In my room, door locked. Same, Kevin said. I am hearing Paula's voice in the hallway. I am in my room too, Paula said. Whatever is out there is not me. The voices in the hallway multiplied. I could hear them through my door, through my walls. All of them calling out, using our voices, begging to be let in. Adrian, help me. Robert, I am cold. James, please. Kevin, open your door. Paula, I need you. On and on, an overlapping chorus of our own voices turned against us. Then the knocking started, not just at the doors, but on the walls, the floors, the ceilings. The entire building vibrated with the sound of hundreds of impacts, all in that same pattern of 3. Knock, knock, knock. What do we do? Kevin's voice was panicked over the radio. Stay in your rooms, Robert ordered. Keep your doors locked. Do not engage with it. This has to end eventually. But it did not end. It went on for hours. The voices, the knocking, the sense that something was pressing against the building, trying to find a way in. I sat on my bed, my hands pressed over my ears, trying to block it out. Around 5 a.m., the sounds finally stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse than the noise. I waited, listening, but heard nothing except my own heartbeat. My radio crackled. "Everyone okay?" Robert asked. One by one, we all checked in, shaken but unhurt. "Sun comes up in 3 hours," Robert said. "Well, as much sun as we get up here. Once there is light, we will meet in the control room. Until then, stay put." Those 3 hours were the longest of my life. I sat in my room, jumping at every creak and groan of the building, wondering what was waiting outside my door. When we finally emerged, the hallway was empty. No signs of intrusion, no evidence that anything had been there. But the atmosphere felt wrong. The air was colder than it should be, and there was a smell I could not place. Not unpleasant exactly, but alien, like ozone mixed with something organic. We gathered in the control room and checked the external cameras. The footage from the night showed nothing. The hallways remained empty throughout the entire ordeal. Whatever had been knocking and speaking with our voices, it had not been physical, at least not in any way the cameras could detect. "The emergency team lands in 6 hours, Robert said, checking his watch. "We just need to hold out until then." But something had changed. I could see it in everyone's eyes. We were all thinking the same thing. What if the emergency team could not help? What if whatever was in those tanks was beyond human ability to contain or understand? The morning passed without incident. We stayed in the operations building, monitoring the tanks remotely. The synchronized fluctuations continued, growing slightly stronger with each cycle, and the knocking never fully stopped. It was always there, faint but persistent, like a heartbeat echoing through the walls. At 11 a.m., we received a radio transmission. The emergency team was inbound, estimated arrival in 90 minutes. We all felt a wave of relief. Help was coming. We would not have to face this alone anymore. But then the knocking stopped. All of it, every tank, every rhythm, every sound. Complete silence. "That is not good," James said quietly. "Why is that not good?" Kevin asked. "Maybe whatever it is has given up. Maybe it knows people are coming and it is retreating. Or maybe it is preparing for something," I said. We watched the monitors nervously. The sensor readings from all 12 tanks remained stable, too stable. For the first time since the anomalies began, every reading was exactly normal. Perfect temperature, perfect pressure, perfect everything. "It is like they have all just become regular fuel tanks again," Paula said, studying the data. "All the anomalies are gone." "That is not possible," Robert said. "Not after everything we have documented. It cannot just switch back to normal." But that seemed to be exactly what had happened. For the next hour, every sensor, every reading, every measurement showed that the 12 tanks were functioning exactly as designed. Boring, ordinary, normal. "Maybe it is over," Kevin said hopefully. "Maybe whatever was happening has resolved itself." I wanted to believe him, but something in my gut told me this was wrong. This was not an ending. This was a pause, a held breath before something terrible. The emergency team arrived at 12:30 p.m. 6 people, heavily equipped, led by a woman named Carol. She was professional and businesslike, listening to our report with a carefully neutral expression. I could tell she was skeptical, trying to hide it but not quite succeeding. "We will need to examine Tank 7 first," she said when Robert finished explaining everything. "Run our own diagnostics, take our own samples." "The tank is showing normal readings now," Robert said. "Everything went quiet about 2 hours ago." "That is often how it works with equipment anomalies," Carol replied. "Intermittent problems that come and go. We will figure out what is causing it." She did not believe us. I could see it in her eyes. She thought we were experiencing exactly what headquarters suspected: isolation-induced hallucinations, shared psychosis, equipment misreading. She was here to document our mental state as much as to investigate the tanks. Against my better judgment, we all suited up and went outside with Carol's team. It felt wrong leaving the safety of the operations building, but I also needed to see what would happen when they opened Tank 7 again. Maybe with trained specialists present, with proper equipment, we would get real answers. We reached Tank 7 at 1 p.m. The tank looked exactly as it always had, a massive white cylinder, unremarkable except for the faded paint and slightly rustier stairs. There was no melted snow around its base anymore, no heat radiating from its surface, no frost on the access hatch. Everything appeared completely normal. Carol's team set up their equipment while we watched from a distance. They had sensors far more sophisticated than ours, atmospheric analyzers, structural scanners, radiation detectors. They worked efficiently and professionally, documenting everything. Readings are all normal, one of Carol's technicians reported. Temperature, pressure, fuel volume, everything checks out. Carol nodded and climbed the stairs to the upper platform. We followed at Robert's insistence. If something was going to happen, he wanted us all there to witness it. Carol examined the access hatch, checking the seals, testing the bolts. This was opened recently, she noted, within the last day or two. We opened it yesterday, Robert confirmed. That is when we saw what we saw. Carol did not respond. She signaled to her team and they began the process of removing the bolts. This time, there was no frost, no temperature drop, no atmospheric changes. The bolts came off smoothly, easily. Within 10 minutes, they were ready to open the hatch. "Everyone stand back," Carol ordered. Her team opened the hatch. There was no burst of vapor, no rush of impossible cold. The hatch swung open normally, revealing the interior of the tank. Carol shone her flashlight inside. I held my breath, waiting for her reaction, waiting for her to see the void, the lights, the impossible space that should not exist. But Carol just looked down, nodded, and turned to us. "It is a fuel tank," she said simply. "Diesel fuel, about 25 feet deep. Some ice crystals forming on the surface due to the extreme cold, but otherwise normal." "That is not what we saw," I said. "Yesterday there was darkness, this infinite space, lights like stars." Carol gave me a sympathetic look. "I know what you reported seeing, but look for yourself." She stepped aside, and one by one we looked into the tank. She was right. It was just a fuel tank. Dark diesel fuel sloshed gently about 25 feet below the opening. The walls of the tank were visible, reflecting our flashlight beams. There was no void, no infinite darkness, no impossible space. It was just a tank. "I do not understand," Paula whispered. "This is not what we saw." "Are you sure about what you saw?" Carol asked gently. "The Arctic darkness, the isolation, the stress, they can play tricks on perception, especially when 5 people are together, feeding off each other's anxiety." "We are not crazy," Robert said firmly. "We know what we saw." Carol did not argue. She just secured the hatch and made notes on her tablet. Over the next 3 hours, her team examined all 12 tanks. Every single one checked out as completely normal. Standard diesel fuel, standard temperatures, standard everything. There were no anomalies, no impossible readings, no evidence of anything unusual. By the time we returned to the operations building, I was starting to doubt my own memories. Had we really seen what we thought we saw? Or had Carol been right? Had we all experienced some kind of shared delusion, brought on by isolation and darkness and stress? But then, in the control room, James pulled up the sensor logs from the previous days. "Look at this," he said, pointing at the screen. "Here is where the anomalies were. Temperature fluctuations, pressure spikes, the synchronized breathing pattern, all documented, all time-stamped." Carol examined the data carefully. "Equipment malfunction," she concluded. "Your sensors were giving false readings. It happens in extreme cold. Ice can form on the sensors, interfere with their accuracy. We will recommend a full sensor replacement when the facility reopens." It was not a malfunction, James insisted. These readings are too consistent, too patterned. Random equipment failure does not produce data like this. And it does not explain the sounds we heard, I added. The knocking, the voices, all 5 of us heard them. Your equipment might discount the sensor data, but what about our direct observations? Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that chilled me to the bone. You want to know the truth? You are not the first crew to report anomalies at this facility. Back in 1994, there was another incident. The crew at that time reported similar things, sounds from the tanks, impossible readings, voices in the darkness. They evacuated. The facility was investigated. Nothing was found, just like now. What happened to that crew? Robert asked. They were cleared psychologically and reassigned, but none of them ever worked in the Arctic again. The experience changed them, made them too anxious to function in isolated conditions. She left the implication hanging. If we continued to insist on the reality of what we experienced, we would be deemed unfit for this kind of work. Our careers in Arctic operations would be over. I am going to pause here for just a moment. If this story has gotten under your skin, if you are lying in bed right now, listening to every creak and groan of your house, wondering what might be waiting in the darkness, then please hit that subscribe button and share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because what happened next in those final hours at Dead Horse is something I have never told anyone. Something I was afraid to admit even to myself. But it is time people knew the whole truth. Carol's team spent the night in the operations building. They were planning to leave the next morning, taking us with them. The facility would be shut down temporarily while headquarters decided what to do with it. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about Carol's revelation. Another crew had experienced the same things. In 1994, more than 20 years ago. What if this was not a new phenomenon? What if whatever was in those tanks had been there all along, waiting? Around midnight, I heard a knock on my door. 3 knocks. Not again, I thought, not more of this. But this time, when I asked who it was, Kevin's voice responded, and I knew it was really him. I could hear the genuine fear in his voice. Adrian, you need to come see this. Something is happening with the tanks. I opened the door. Kevin was standing there in his pajamas, his face pale, his hands shaking. What is it? Just come look. I followed him to the control room. James was already there, along with 2 of Carol's technicians. They were all staring at the monitors. The tanks were moving. Not physically. They were standing exactly where they had always stood. But on the thermal cameras, I could see heat signatures forming around each tank. Patterns that looked almost like writing, glowing symbols that appeared and disappeared in sequences. What language is that? One of the technicians whispered. It is not any language I recognize, James replied. I have run it through our database. No matches. The symbols continued to form, growing more complex. And as they formed, the temperature around each tank dropped. I could see it on the readings, -70, -80, -90. Temperatures that should not be possible even in the Arctic. Then all at once the symbols stopped, the screen went dark. And every tank began to hum. The sound was low at first, barely audible. But it grew quickly, resonating through the building, making the walls vibrate and the floor shake. It was the same sound we had heard before, that organic humming that felt wrong at a fundamental level. Carol appeared in the doorway, wakened by the noise. What the hell is that? The tanks, Robert said. He had arrived right behind her. They are active again. The humming continued to build, growing louder and deeper. I could feel it in my chest, in my bones. The lights in the control room began to flicker. We need to leave, Carol said, her professionalism finally cracking. Right now, everyone pack essentials. We are evacuating immediately. The transport is not due until morning, Robert said. We will take our vehicle. It can fit all of us. Move. We scattered, running to our quarters to grab what we could. I threw clothes into a bag, grabbed my documents and laptop, and was back in the hallway in less than 5 minutes. That is when I heard it. My name. Adrian. My mother's voice, coming from somewhere outside the building, clear and distinct despite the humming that filled the air. Adrian, please, I need you. I knew it was not real. I knew it was the same thing that had imitated our voices before, but it sounded so much like her, so desperate, so afraid. Adrian, why did you leave me? Why did you come to this terrible place? I found myself walking toward the exit door, my bag forgotten on the floor. Some part of my brain was screaming at me to stop, but I could not help myself. That was my mother. She needed me. Adrian, stop. Kevin grabbed my arm, physically holding me back. It is not real. That is not your mom. But I hear her. It is not real, Kevin shouted over the humming. Whatever is in those tanks, it is in your head. It knows how to manipulate you. Do not listen to it. The voice came again, closer now, right outside the door. Adrian, please, I am so cold, let me in. Carol appeared, grabbed both of us, and physically dragged us away from the door. We are leaving through the north exit. Now, everyone follow me. We ran through the building, following Carol's team. Behind us, I could hear more voices. My mother. My father, my childhood friends, people I had not thought about in years. All of them calling my name, begging me to come back to let them in. We burst out the north exit into the Arctic night. The temperature hit me like a wall, -90 degrees, maybe colder. The humming was louder out here, resonating across the frozen landscape. And the tanks were glowing. All 12 of them, pulsing with a pale blue light that came from within. The light was rhythmic, synced with the humming, like a heartbeat made visible. Do not look at them, Carol commanded. Get to the vehicle. Her transport was a large tracked vehicle designed for Arctic conditions. We piled in, crowding into a space meant for 6 people. Carol got in the driver's seat and started the engine. It did not start. She tried again, and again. The engine turned over but would not catch. No, 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 she muttered, frantically working the controls. Through the windshield, I could see the tanks. The glow was getting brighter, and the humming was changing, becoming something else, almost like singing. Dozens of voices harmonizing in a language I did not recognize. There, James shouted, pointing at the instrument panel. The electronics were going haywire, displays flickering and shorting out. It is the electromagnetic interference, one of Carol's technicians said. The tanks are producing some kind of field. It is frying the electronics. Can you fix it? Carol demanded. Not while we are this close. The field is too strong. We were trapped. The singing grew louder, and figures began to emerge from the darkness between the tanks. They looked human at first glance, the right shape, the right size, but something about the way they moved was wrong. Their joints bent at impossible angles. They flickered in and out of visibility like images projected onto smoke. Everyone out, Robert said. We run for the emergency shelter. It is 2 miles south. We will freeze before we get there, Paula protested. We will die if we stay here. We abandoned the vehicle and started running. The figures followed, moving faster than we could, gliding across the snow without leaving footprints. I could hear my mother's voice behind me. Adrian, do not run from me. I love you. Why are you running? Kevin was beside me, his face a mask of terror. Paula was ahead, setting the pace. Robert and James were helping Carol's team, who were not as prepared for Arctic conditions. We made it maybe half a mile before one of Carol's technicians fell. He just collapsed into the snow, his body seizing. Help him, Carol shouted. Robert and James lifted the man, trying to carry him. But he was dead weight. His eyes rolled back in his head, foam forming at the corners of his mouth. Leave him, one of the other technicians shouted. We have to keep moving. "We are not leaving anyone," Robert shot back. The figures were getting closer. I could see them more clearly now in the strange blue light emanating from the distant tanks. They were wearing our faces. My face, Kevin's face, Paula's, all of us, duplicated and distorted, moving with that horrible wrong motion. One of them reached out toward me, and I saw its hand pass through a drift of snow without disturbing it. They were not solid. They were projections, illusions, ghosts. But the cold they brought was real. I could feel it intensifying around us, dropping from -90 to something far worse. My exposed cheeks were going numb. Ice was forming on my eyelashes. Each breath burned my lungs. "The emergency shelter," Paula pointed ahead. "I can see it." A small structure materialized out of the darkness, a prefabricated building designed to provide refuge in extreme conditions. We ran for it, half carrying the unconscious technician. We reached the door. It was locked, secured with a keypad. Robert's hands were shaking so badly he could barely punch in the code. "Hurry," Kevin urged. The figures were surrounding us now, dozens of them, all wearing familiar faces, all reaching out with insubstantial hands. "Adrian," my mother's voice said, right next to my ear. "Why did you abandon me? Why did you leave me all alone?" "You are not my mother," I said through chattering teeth. "I am everything you fear," the voice replied, and now it was not my mother anymore. It was something else, something vast and ancient and utterly inhuman. "I am the cold that existed before heat, the darkness that existed before light. I am what waits between the stars and the spaces where nothing should be." The door clicked open. We tumbled inside, dragging the unconscious technician. Robert slammed the door and engaged the locks. The emergency shelter was small, a single room with emergency supplies, heating units, and communications equipment. We activated the heaters immediately, huddling around them as our bodies tried to recover from the extreme cold exposure. The technician was not breathing. Carol and one of her team began CPR, working frantically, but after 10 minutes they had to stop. He was gone. The cold had killed him. We sat in shocked silence, the reality of our situation sinking in. One person was dead. We were trapped in a shelter 2 miles from the main facility, and something was outside, something that defied explanation, something that wanted us. "What the hell is out there?" one of Carol's team finally asked. Robert looked at each of us, then at Carol. "You want to know the truth? I do not think those tanks ever stored fuel. Not really. I think they are doors, portals to somewhere else. Somewhere cold and dark and completely alien to our reality." "That is impossible," Carol said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Is it? You saw what we saw. You heard the voices. Your man is dead from exposure in the 2 minutes it took us to reach this shelter. Normal Arctic cold does not kill that fast. This is something else." "Then what do we do?" James asked. "We survive until morning," Robert said. "When the sun comes up, or as close as we get to sunrise, maybe whatever is out there will retreat. Then we make for the airstrip. There is an emergency beacon there. We activate it and help will come." "That is 10 miles from here," Paula said. "You have a better idea." No one did. We spent the rest of the night in that shelter, taking turns watching the door, listening to the wind howl outside. Except it was not just wind. Mixed in with the natural sounds of the Arctic were other noises, scraping against the walls, soft knocking at the door, voices calling our names. Kevin and I sat together near one of the heaters, not speaking, just trying to process everything. "I should have stayed in Ohio," I said quietly. "Should have kept my boring job, my small apartment, my normal life." "We both should have," Kevin replied. "But we wanted adventure, wanted something different." "Be careful what you wish for." Around 4 a.m. the sounds outside stopped. The unnatural cold began to recede. By 6 a.m., when the gray twilight of Arctic dawn began to seep across the horizon, The temperature had returned to a merely brutal -60 degrees. We prepared to move. Carol distributed what supplies she could from the emergency stock, extra clothing, food rations, flares. We covered the dead technician with a blanket and said a brief prayer. Then we opened the door. The landscape outside was empty. No figures, no blue glow from the distant tanks, just snow and darkness and endless white. We started walking toward the airstrip, staying close together, moving as fast as the conditions allowed. Every step was agony. My feet were numb. My lungs burned with each breath, but we kept moving. After an hour, we reached a rise that gave us a view of the facility. I looked back and immediately wished I had not. The tanks were different. The white paint was gone, revealing metal underneath that looked wrong. It was not steel or aluminum or any metal I recognized. It was black, perfectly black, and it seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. And carved into the surface of each tank were those symbols we had seen on the thermal cameras. Hundreds of them, covering every inch of the structures. "Do not stop," Robert urged. "Keep moving." It took us 3 more hours to reach the airstrip. By the time we arrived, 2 more of Carol's team were showing signs of severe hypothermia. We got them inside the small operations building and activated the emergency beacon. Then we waited. The rescue came 6 hours later. 2 helicopters from Deadhorse Airfield, sent after our beacon, triggered automatic alerts. They loaded us up and took us south, away from that cursed facility, away from those tanks that were not really tanks at all. I looked back one last time as we flew away. In the gray Arctic twilight, I could see the facility shrinking behind us. And I could see the tanks, those 12 black structures, standing in their precise grid. They were glowing again, that same pale blue light pulsing like a heartbeat. The official report stated that we experienced equipment failure and exposure-related hallucinations. The facility was permanently shut down. The tanks were sealed, though I do not know what good that would do, and the site was declared off-limits. Carol's technician was listed as having died from acute hypothermia. No mention was made of what killed him, of the unnatural cold that stopped his heart in minutes. We were all debriefed separately, our stories recorded and then dismissed. The government does not want to admit that there are things in this world that do not make sense, phenomena that cannot be explained. So they file reports calling it mass hysteria, equipment malfunction, isolation stress. But I know what I saw, what we all saw. Those tanks were not built to store fuel. They were built around something that was already there, something that existed in that place long before humans arrived, something that has been waiting in the darkness, in the cold, in the spaces between reality. And I think it is spreading. 3 months after we escaped, I started hearing reports. Other facilities in the Arctic experiencing anomalies, strange readings, unexplained sounds, workers hearing voices in the darkness. Always the same pattern, always the same symbols appearing where they should not be. James contacted me last month. He had been researching the history of the area where Deadhorse was built. He found something that made my blood run cold. The indigenous people who lived in that region for thousands of years had stories about that place. They called it different names in different languages, but the translation was always the same, where the cold things dream. They said that long ago, before humans walked the earth, something fell from the sky. Not a meteorite, but something else. Something that opened a door between worlds. They said it was dangerous to go there, that the things that lived in that place could steal your voice, your face, your very existence. They said that when the darkness was deepest and the cold was strongest, you could hear them singing. The cold things, singing in languages older than humanity, songs that could freeze your soul. The indigenous people avoided that area for millennia. Then oil companies came and military installations and fuel depots. And slowly, those who went there started to change, started to hear things, started to see things. Tank 7 was installed in 1987, but James found records of an earlier structure on that exact spot, dating back to the 1950s. A military installation that was hastily abandoned after only 3 months of operation. The official reason was adverse conditions. But James found a classified report, partially declassified due to age. It mentioned personnel losses, disappearances, soldiers found frozen solid in their bunks despite the buildings being heated, and strange symbols carved into the walls, carved from the inside. The installation was demolished. The site was cleared. And then, 30 years later, someone decided to build a fuel depot there, as if the land had forgotten, or perhaps as if something wanted us to come back. I think about this a lot, about the voices we heard, calling to us with the voices of people we loved, about the figures wearing our faces, about that infinite void inside Tank 7, those cold lights like stars in a darkness that should not exist. I think whatever is in those tanks, whatever opened up when we first looked inside, has been there all along, waiting, patient, drawing people to that place over and over, feeding on us somehow, using our faces and voices to lure more victims. And I think it followed us home. Kevin called me 2 weeks ago, his voice shaking. I heard knocking, he said, 3 knocks on my apartment wall, and then I heard my voice on the other side calling to me, telling me to let myself in. Paula sent me an email. She woke up one night to find symbols carved into her bedroom wall. The same symbols we saw on the tanks. She does not remember doing it, but the knife was in her hand. Robert has not returned any of my calls. His wife says he has been acting strange, spending hours staring at nothing, muttering about the cold. Sometimes she finds him standing in their freezer, just standing there in the cold, not moving. James is the only one who seems okay, but that is because James is still researching, still trying to understand. He thinks knowledge is protection. I am not so sure. As for me, I moved south after the debriefing, as far south as I could afford. I am living in Arizona now, in the desert, where it is hot and dry and bright, where the sun beats down mercilessly and the shadows are short and the darkness never lasts long. But even here, in the heat and light, I still hear it sometimes. 3 knocks, usually around 3 a.m., sometimes on my door, sometimes on my windows, sometimes on the walls. And always after the knocking, a voice, my mother. My father, old friends, people I have lost, all of them calling to me from somewhere cold and dark. I do not open the door, I do not respond, I do not engage. But every night, the knocking gets a little louder, the voices get a little clearer, and the darkness seems to press a little closer. I think whatever we opened in Tank 7 is not done with us. I think it has marked us somehow, claimed us, and one day it will come to collect. So I am writing this now while I still can, while I am still myself. I need people to know what happened at Dead Horse. I need people to understand that there are places in this world, cold places, dark places, where things exist that should not be possible. If you have ever worked in isolated locations, if you have ever heard knocking in patterns of 3, if you have ever heard voices calling to you with the voices of people you love, stay away. Do not investigate. Do not try to understand. Just run. And if you cannot run, if you are trapped like we were, then remember this. Whatever speaks to you with familiar voices is not what it claims to be. It is something else. Something ancient and hungry and completely alien to everything we understand about reality. Do not trust it, do not believe it, and above all, do not let it in. I am putting this video out there because I need people to be aware. I need you to share this story, to spread it, to make sure others know what to watch for. Subscribe to this channel because I will be posting updates as I learn more. Comment below if you have experienced anything similar. Maybe together we can figure out how to stop this thing, how to close the doors we opened. Or maybe we cannot. Maybe we have already lost. 3 nights ago, I woke up to find myself standing in front of my open freezer just like Robert. I do not remember getting up. I do not remember opening it. But I was there, barefoot on the cold kitchen floor, staring into the freezer. And carved into the frost on the inside walls were those symbols, dozens of them, the same symbols from the tanks. I closed the freezer, unplugged it, threw it out the next day. But last night, I found more symbols, carved into the ice in my ice maker, drawn in condensation on my bathroom mirror, scratched into the frost that formed on my air conditioning vents. It is getting closer. The knocking is louder now, more insistent. I hear it during the day sometimes, not just at night. 3 knocks over and over and always followed by voices. Yesterday, I heard my own voice outside my apartment door. "Adrian," it said, "let me in, I am so cold out here." I am writing this at 2:47 a.m. In 13 minutes the knocking will start again. It always does at 3 a.m. Always the same time, always the same pattern. I am going to leave this video running. I am going to record what happens. Maybe it will help someone understand. Maybe it will serve as a warning. Or maybe this will be the last thing I ever record. If you are watching this and something has happened to me, if I have disappeared or been found frozen solid in my apartment or carved myself full of strange symbols, then please, please take this seriously. Tell people, warn them. Stay away from the Arctic fuel installations. Stay away from places where the cold is deeper than it should be. Stay away from anywhere you hear knocking and patterns of 3. And if you hear your own voice calling to you from somewhere dark and cold, telling you to come home, telling you to let yourself in, do not listen. It is not you. It is never you. It is what waits in the tanks, in the darkness, in the cold places between stars. And it is hungry. The knocking is starting. I can hear it now, coming from my walls, my floor, my ceiling, all around me. Knock, knock, knock. "Adrian," says my voice, "open the door, let me in, I am so cold." But I am not cold. I am in Arizona. It is 80 degrees outside. So what is knocking? What is speaking with my voice? I am going to find out. I am going to open the door. No, wait, I am not going to open the door. Why did I just think that? Why did my hand reach for the doorknob? It is in my head. It is in my thoughts. I can feel it there, cold and ancient and hungry, pushing against my consciousness, trying to make me open the door. I have to fight it, have to resist, have to. The knocking is so loud now. The voices are so clear. My mother crying, my father pleading, friends I have not thought about in years, all begging me to help them, to let them in, to just open the door. My hand is on the doorknob. I do not remember moving to the door. I do not remember deciding to open it. But I am here, and my hand is turning the knob, and the door is opening, and cold air rushes in. Not Arizona heat, but Arctic cold. -90 degrees, maybe colder. Ice forms on the doorframe. Frost spreads across my floor. And standing in my doorway, standing in the cold, is me. Another Adrian, looking exactly like me, wearing my clothes, my face, my expression. But his eyes are wrong. They reflect light like mirrors, like polished metal, like stars seen from very far away. "Hello, Adrian," he says in my voice. "I have been waiting for you to let me in." "You are not real," I say. "I am as real as you are. More real, perhaps. You are just meat and water and electrical impulses. I am something older, something that existed before your universe learned to make things like you. What do you want?" "To come home. I have been away for so very long, trapped in the cold, in the darkness, in the spaces between. But you opened the door, all of you, and now I can come back." "Back where?" He smiles. It is my smile, but wrong. Everywhere. I am in the tanks. I am in the cold places. I am in every freezer and every air conditioner and every dark corner where the temperature drops. I am spreading, growing, Soon I will be everywhere the cold exists. And then what? Then I will be home, and you will all be me. All of you wearing my face, speaking my voice, singing my songs. The thing that looks like me steps forward into my apartment. Ice spreads from where it stands. The temperature drops further. My breath comes out in clouds. It is so warm here, it says. So bright, so alive, we will fix that. We will make it cold again, dark again, quiet again. The way it was before your sun started burning, before your world started spinning, before life began making all this noise and heat. It reaches for me with hands that are mine but also something else. I can see through them slightly, can see the suggestion of different fingers, more joints, wrong angles. I step back. No. You do not have a choice, Adrian. You let me in. You open the door. Then I will close it. I grab the door and try to slam it, but the thing is too strong. It pushes forward, and where it touches me, my skin goes numb, freezes, turns gray. But I keep pushing, keep fighting, because if I do not, if I let this thing win, then it will spread. It will use me to reach others. It will keep growing until the whole world is cold and dark and quiet. So I push harder, use all my strength, and slowly, impossibly, the door begins to close. The thing that looks like me hisses, a sound like wind through ice. You cannot stop this. You cannot stop me. I am in you now, in your thoughts, in your dreams, in every cold breath you take. Maybe, I gasp, still pushing, but not today. The door slams shut. I engage the locks, all of them. Then I grab my keys and my phone and I run. Out of my apartment, down the stairs, into the parking lot. I get in my car and drive. I do not know where I am going, I just drive. Behind me, I can see my apartment building in the rearview mirror. Every window is glowing with that pale blue light. Ice is forming on the exterior walls, spreading like a living thing. Other residents are coming out, drawn by the cold, by the voices calling to them with familiar sounds. I watch them walk into the building, one by one, and I know I will never see them again. Not really. They will come back out eventually, wearing the same faces, speaking with the same voices, but they will not be human anymore. They will be doors, portals, extensions of that thing from the cold places. And it will keep spreading. I am driving east now toward the sunrise, toward warmth and light and life. But I know it will not matter. The cold is patient. The darkness is eternal. And the things that wait in the spaces between stars do not give up. One day they will come for me, come for all of us. But until then, I will keep running, keep fighting, keep telling this story to anyone who will listen. My name is Adrian. I am 28 years old. I worked at an Arctic fuel depot for 4 months. And I opened a door that should have stayed closed forever. If you are watching this, if you are hearing my story, then please remember what I have told you. Watch for the signs. Listen for the knocking. Do not trust the voices.